أولى ثانوي. فرصة جديدة وحلم جديد وهنعديها بالتأكيد، وهنعديها بالتأكيد. أولى ثانوي.
أهلا بكم طلبة وطالبات الصف الأول الثانوي على قناة مدرستنا 3 تحت إشراف وزارة التربية والتعليم. Welcome back my dear students. Today we will start chapter 3 and the first lesson, and let's see what we'll take today. Let's go. We will start, as I said, chapter 3, which talk about the force. At the first, let's see the objective of our lesson. We will define the force, explain Newton's first law, and we will see a mathematical formula or mathematical equation that expresses Newton's first law. Then we will define the inertia and explain Newton's first law and see some application, and we will do some exercise about the law. We studied before in the previous lessons the motion of the object by studying the velocity and the acceleration, but we didn't study the reason behind this motion. In this chapter, specifically in this lesson, we will study the reasons or the causes of the motion of this object. First, we will suppose some things, or we'll see two life situations in our life. If you have some books on your table in the room, and you left your room for several hours or for a while of time, then you came back. Would you observe or note any change in the position of your books? Think for a while. And if we have here a ball and you throw the ball on the ground, and we suppose that there is no friction force between the ball and the ground, would you think that the ball will stop the motion or it will continue moving on the ground? When you note the motion of the ball on the ground, and as we said, we suppose there is no friction force between the ball and the ground, what do you think? Will it stop moving? The answer for the two questions, of course, is going to be no. Because if you are sure there is no person in the room that you left, and you left your books on the table, بس انت لازم تكون متأكد ان مفيش حد لا هيدخل ولا هيخرج. البوكس هتفضل لوحدها كده في الروم. Since you come back to the room, you will find it at its position, and there is no change in the state of the books. And the same for the ball. If there is no friction force between the ball and the ground, the ball will keep moving with a constant or a uniform velocity on the ground. And what do you think? Why there is no change in the state of the books or in the ball in the two cases? Just to change the state of the two objects that we have, you should have external effect or influence that affects on this body. This effect or external effect, we call it the force, اللي هي القوة. لما تلاقي عندك object والستيت بتاعته ما حصلهاش أي change, which means there is no external effect. زي الكاب دي، أنا سبت الكاب دي مثلا موجودة هنا كده وخرجت ورحت وجيت وأنا متأكدة إن مفيش حد موجود هنا، هرجع ألاقيها زي ما هي. تمام؟ طب لو جيت ولقيتها البوزيشن بتاعها متغير، مش البوزيشن بتاعها اتغير، مثلا بقت كده او بقت هناك في اخر التيبل الموجوده عندي، which means انا متاكده ان الكاب دي مش هتتحرك لوحدها، لازم يكون في external effect that moves this cup or change its position. الاكسترنال effect ده which is called the force، لازم في قوه خارجيه جت اثرت عليها، بس لازم يكون في عندنا condition للفورس that changes the state of the object، وهنعرفها دلوقتي ان شاء الله. First, we will define the force. What is the meaning of force? Force is an external influence. It's an external influence or external effect. Effect which means حاجة خارجية، مؤثر خارجي مش من الأوبجكت نفسه، لازم يكون خارجي من بره. بيعمل ايه بقى؟ change the state of the object, which means if the object moves, the force will make it stop, or if the object is static, the force will make this object moves with a constant or gain an acceleration. And of course, the measuring unit for the force, it's in Newton, as we have taken before. When we have some examples for the applying force on the object that change its state, just like force exerted by your muscle or by your body when you pull or push a box. As we said, if I have this cup, I will pull this cup towards me, or I will push the cup far from me. In the two cases, I applied force on the cup. One is a pull force and the other is a push force. The force of the car engine that help the car to start motion. The force of brakes that acts on the car to stop its motion. The two they have an opposite effect on the car. And the friction force between two objects, as when you bring your hand just together, you have two objects, they are in contact together, you have a friction force between the two objects. Okay. All of these forces, we can see the effect of these forces, or they may be visible for us, just like a push force or a pull force, they are visible. أنا هقدر أشوف لو أنا بشد الحاجة أو بزقها أو لو في friction force ما بين أي two moving objects in contact together, it's a visible forces. دي قوة أنا شايفاها بقدر أشوفها وبقدر أشوف الإفكت. But we have some more type of forces which is invisible. قوة أنا ما بشوفهاش. Just like the gravitational force. The earth affected our bodies with a gravitational force, which is force, it's invisible. انت ما بتشوفش الارض وهي بتجذبك، مش شايف الافكت او you can't see the force. You can't see the force itself, but you see the effect of the force. And we have another type of force, just like magnetic force or electric force or nuclear force. All of these forces, they are invisible for us. And to study the force and its effects on the object, we will study 3 laws of motion, which is called Newton's law of motion. We will study in this semester the first and the third law, and in the next semester, inshallah, we'll take the second law. Newton's first law of motion, which is denoted as a static object keeps its state of rest, and a moving object keeps its state of motion at a uniform velocity and in a straight line unless acted upon by a resultant force, which means any object, it has a tendency to keep its state by itself. يعني لو عندي object, a static object, just like this cup, it wants to keep its state. هيفضل محتفظ بالستيت بتاعته أو بالحالة بتاعته. أو لو عندي moving object in a straight line with a constant velocity, it's going to keep its state too, unless unbalanced external force applied or affected on this object. كل object هيكيب الستيت بتاعته، هيفضل محافظ على الحالة بتاعته إلا إذا أثرت عليه قوة خارجية، حاجة من بره، قوة من بره هي اللي هتعمل تشينج للستيت بتاعته. بس في عندي condition، الفورس دي ما ينفعش تكون balanced force، ما ينفعش تكون قوة متزنة، لأن in this case الإفكت بتاعها equal 0 ومش هيحصل أي change في الستيت بتاعت الأوبجكت. تمام؟ طب we have a mathematical formula that express the first law or Newton's first law, which is mean a resultant force or total force applying on the object equal 0, and this is the condition to keep the object its state. From this definition, we can conclude something. ايه بقى الحاجة اللي احنا ممكن نستنتجها كده؟ ان الاوبجكت نفسه او الجسم نفسه ما بيقدرش يغير الحالة لوحده. يبقى لازم يكون في عندي external effect which is called the force. طب what is the meaning of inability of the object to change its state by itself? It's called inertia. inertia اللي هي يعني بالعربي اللي هو القصور الذاتي, which means ان الobject نفسه it can't change its state by itself. طيب, so inertia, it's the tendency of an object to keep either its state of rest or state of motion at its original uniform velocity in a straight line. بمعنى ان الاوبجكت نفسه هو عاوز يكيب الستيت بتاعته، لو هو ساكن كده عايز يفضل قاعد كده على طول، مش عايز يغير الستيت بتاعته، وما يقدرش لوحده. Even we have a moving object with a uniform velocity in a straight line، هو كمان نفس الاوبجكت ده عايز يفضل يتحرك على طول، مش عايز يغير الستيت بتاعته وعايز يفضل كده. أو we have another definition just for the inertia. It's the property of objects to resist the change of its static or dynamic state. يبقى هي دي بتبقى الانرشيا في الدبس اوف نوليدج بتاعنا لحد دلوقتي. مش هناخد القانون اللي بنحسب بيه الانرشيا او هو عباره عن ايه، لكن بالنسبه لنا احنا نفهم ان الانرشيا هي عباره عن property of the object. دي خاصيه من خصائص الاوبجكت نفسه، اي جسم موجود، ان هو عنده النيه او التندنسي، الرغبه ان هو يكيب its state whatever being this state, a static state or a dynamic state, and he can't change it by his own self. Let's see some example for the inertia. As we said, all the objects, they have the tendency to keep its state, which means all the objects have inertia. But all the objects have the same ability of the same strength of inertia or not. If you have a bus, or it's a wall ball, and a clock, an apple, a bottle, or a house, whatever being, we have a several or a different object. All of them have the same inertia, have the same value or the strength of inertia, the same resistance to change its state, yes or no? If we have just a small example for this to understand the meaning, we have two different bars. They are from the same material, مصنوع من نفس النوع، بس we have a big one and a small one. Big one, which means I'm not talking about the volume, but I'm talking about the mass. And as we said, they are from the same kind or from the same material, which means they have the same density, which means the more volume, which means the more mass. So the bigger one has bigger mass, and the smaller one has a smaller mass. Which one of them had a more tendency to keep its state or to resist the change of its state, the big one or the small one? With another question or another type, which one of them needs more force to make it move? The heavier object have a more tendency. لما يكون عندي الجسم بيكون كبير، فبالتالي الانرشيا بتاعته it's more، لان هتكون resistance بتاعته to change its state it's more, which means I need more force to make the bigger one or the bigger mass to move or to change its state. So when the mass increases, that means the inertia of the object increases too, which means its ability to resist the change increases, which means I need more force to apply on this object just to change its state or make it move if it's a static object. Which means in mass, it's the measure of its inertia, which means طبعا انا بالنسبه لي تعتبر الماس هنا it's يعني زي indicator او معيار او مقياس للانرشيا بتاعت الاوبجكت. The more the mass increase, the more the inertia of the object increase, which means I need more force to change the state of this object. We have in our life situations some exercises or some examples for the inertia. Just like طبعا كلنا عارفين الاكزامبل بتاع الباص ده او بتاع whatever being الفيكل اللي انت بتكون راكبها، تمام. If the driver suddenly use the brakes، تبقى عادي كده انت واقف في الباص عادي او في المترو whatever، وسuddenly ابتدى حصل مثلا في مطب او حاجه وابتدى الدرايفر نفسه use the brake. ايه اللي بيحصل؟ بتلاقي نفسك ايه؟ projected forward، تلاقي نفسك طلعت الايه؟ لقدام ولا لورا؟ لو في بريكس تلاقي نفسك رجعت لورا، تمام. ولا بتعمل ايه اللي بيحصل بقى؟ فكروا كده شويه. When you use the brake you will find your body projected forward. ليه بقى؟ لان المفروض احنا اتفقنا ان الاوبجكت في حاجه اسمها inertia. inertia دي ان هي الاوبجكت بيكيب اتس ستيت، عاوز يكيب الستيت بتاعته. تمام. طب هو الستيت بتاعته كان بيتحرك فماشي فورورد، ماشي لقدام. فالبريكس بتعمل ايه؟ بتخلي الاوبجكت يستوب. ستوب يعني ستوب موفينج. فالاوبجكت نفسه بيريزست، هو مش عايز يقف، هو عايز يكيب الموشن بتاعه. فبيعمل ايه؟ بيريجكت فورورد، بتلاقي نفسه كده بروجكتد فورورد، حدف بس سنه قدام، اللي هو ده الدايركشن اللي كان ماشي فيه. بس بعد كده بيحصل ايه؟ بيبتدي يعني خلاص هي جيف اب، ويبتدي يستسلم للنيو ستيت ان الكار بقت فيها، فبيبتدي يقف تاني. طب وانس يبتدي الدرايفر هيبتدي يموف الكار، فبيعمل ايه؟ هتلاقي جسمك بروجكتد باكورد، هتلاقي جسمك اتحدف لورا كده شويه. طب اتحدف لورا ليه؟ هو عايز يكيب الستاتيك ستيت بتاعته، عايز يفضل قاعد ساكن ما يتحركش. تمام. طب فين البوزيشن اللي كان هو ساكن فيه لما كان في الحركه دي؟ مش عايز يطلع لقدام، فبيرجع لورا شويه because of the inertia، وبعد كده بيعمل adaptation مع النيو سيتويشن بتاعت الكار اللي انت موجود فيها، لان حالتك هي حاله الفيكل او الكار اللي انت موجود فيها. نفس الكلام لو عندك الفان هنا. طبعا كلنا بنبقى عارفين اول ما بنيجي بنشغل المروحه بنيجي نعمل سويتش اون، بنلاقي المروحه ايه؟ بتلف بالراحه شويه، وبعد كده بتعمل ايه؟ بتبتدي تاخد الفلوسيتي بتاعتها وتجيب الكونستنت فلوسيتي اللي بتتحرك بيها. طب ليه مش اول ما احط الفيشه وشغاله على طول بتبتدي تدور بالعدد اللفات او الار بي ام اللي بتبقى موجوده عليها؟ because of the inertia. الفانز الموجود عندي it want to keep its state، عايزه تحافظ على الستيت بتاعتها it's not moving. طب بس انا لما عملت سويتش اون وشغلتها هتبتدي تعمل ايه؟ المفروض انها تتحرك، فهي هتريزست الموشن دي فور انستنت، لحاجات بس وقت بسيط، وبعد كده هتعمل ادابتيشن مع نيو سيتويشن او النيو ستيت وهتبتدي تموف اون. طب لما تيجي تعمل سويتش اوف نفس الكلام، المفروض اول ما تشد الفيشه او تقفلها خلاص تقف. برضو بسبب الانرشيا بتعمل ايه؟ بتكيب ذا ستيت اوف موشن بتاعتها، بتريزست ذا ستوب اللي انت عملته، مش عايزه تقف، بس بعد كده بتعمل ادابتيشن مع النيو سيتويشن وبتقف. نفس الكلام هنا برضو لو هنتكلم عن نفس الاكزامبل بتاع الباص ده، عشان كده this is the important of the seat belt. لازم دايما يقول لك حزام الامان، حزام الامان. فاحنا بنعمله ايه؟ عشان بس to avoid the dangers of the inertia. لو انت مثلا سايق بسرعه كبيره جدا والسادنلي مثلا حصل حاجه، فبتضطر ان انت هتدوس على البريكس، because of the inertia your body will project forward، هتلاقي جسمك اتحدف لقدام. ولو انت ماشي بسرعه كبيره جدا ممكن تكون الشوك نفسها تعمل لك اي dangers او bad effect on your body. اللي protect this effect مين؟ اللي هو السيت بيلت. عشان كده دايما نقول حط حزام الامان بتاعك معاك. طيب we will take some examples but to be sure or to verify the comprehension of the meaning of inertia or Newton's first law. If you have a ball here with a mass 300 kilogram and you have an object or a person that push a ball. Okay. They placed on a rough horizontal surface as in the opposite, as we see. It's on the ground. So the resultant of the acting force on the box equal. And this box or this ball, it's not moving. في واحد عمال بيزق في الكرة والكرة دي ما اتحركتش. تمام؟ والماس بتاعتها 300 كيلو جرام. فالresultant or the total applying force on this ball equal. It's not moving, which means it's keep its state. There is no change in the state of the ball, which means a total affected forces on the object equal. There's no force applying on it, so which means a total force here equal 0. لأن احنا اتفقنا إن احنا لو الأوبجكت اللي عندي change its state, which means there is external effect or external force applying on this object. But the state you apply force. Okay, هو بيزق بس الأوبجكت نفسه ما غيرش الستيت بتاعه, which means in it total force equal 0. Let's go. For example 2, if you have this graph, you have a velocity on the y-axis and the time on the x-axis. We have here an object affected by 3 forces, F1, F2, and F3, where F1 and F2 is in the opposite direction of F3. So which of the following equations is correct? From this graph, we have a uniform velocity or a constant velocity, which means there is no acceleration. Acceleration equals 0, which means total force equal 0. طب in which case بقى أنا عندي F1 و F2 وفي opposite direction. طب عشان يكون التوتال فورس بتاعهم equal 0 ده معناه إيه؟ إن F1 plus F2 equal F3. طيب. Okay. This is all for this episode, and let's talk and go to summarize what we have taken on the live board. Let's go. The text of the law, which say Newton's first law, which is the object had the tendency to resist the change of its state from static state to a moving state or vice versa, which means if we have an object moving with a uniform velocity, it wants to keep its state. And if we have a static object, it wants to keep its static state. So the object itself, it can't change the state by itself unless unbalanced force applied on this object which make or which change the state of this object. And we have taken the mathematical formula for Newton's first law, which is a resultant or applying total force on the object equal 0. And we call this law the law of inertia. And we said the inertia, this is the property of the object to resist the change of its state from static or from rest or moving with a uniform velocity in a straight line. اتفقنا ان كل object بيبقى له inertia، والinertia دي عبارة عن resistance للchange اللي بيحصل في الستيت بتاعت الاوبجكت. هو لو عندي object static عايز يفضل static على طول، لو moving with uniform velocity in a straight line عايز keep its state. تمام؟ طيب واتفقنا ان في عندي indicator للinertia of the body. The more the mass, when the mass of the object increase, the inertia of the object increases too, which means it needs a more force, or we have to apply a more force on this object to change its state. Which means when we have a big ball and a small ball, we need to apply a more force, which means F1 and هنا F2. يبقى F1 it's going to be more than F2 to make the object moves. طيب and which means طبعا inertia بتاعت big mass it's more than the inertia of the small mass. طيب if we take just a little example to verify our understanding of inertia. If we draw the relation between the displacement covered by object and the time taken by second, and we get this graph. And we have two values over here. We have a 30 meter in 10 seconds. And the mass of this object equal 10 kilogram. So the total applying force on this object, it's going to be equal 0 Newton, 3 Newton, 30 Newton, or 300 Newton. Just to find the force, we know that the force equal mass times acceleration of motion of the object. طيب الماس موجود عندي 10 kilogram, but we need to get the acceleration of motion. What represents the slope of this graph? السلوب عندي هنا equal LV, the velocity of motion. And as we know, the straight line, which means it's a constant value. So the velocity here, it's a constant. قيمة ثابتة or a uniform velocity. يعني الجسم الأوبجكت بيتحرك بسرعة ثابتة أو بسرعة بتاعته ما اتغيرتش from the beginning to the end of the motion, which means there is no acceleration. ما عنديش acceleration. تمام؟ يبقى الأكسلريشن هنا بتequal 0. So the force or resultant force applying on the object it's gonna equal 0. وده بيأكد لي نيوتن's first law إن الأوبجكت بيkeep its motion in a constant velocity in a straight line unless unequilibrium forces applied on them. فالفورس هنا لازم تكون بت equal zero to keep the motion with a constant or a uniform velocity. This is all for today. Thank you. I hope it's useful for today. See you next time, inshallah. Bye bye. Thank you, my dear student. This is all for today. I hope it's useful and you have spent a nice time with me. Thank you. I'll see you next time, inshallah. Bye bye.
أولى ثانوي، فرصة جديدة وحلم جديد وهنعديها بالتأكيد.